begin. Time will begin on my first word. Me and my partner strongly affirm the resolution that the UK should rejoin the EU. The UK should rejoin the EU for many reasons like economy benefits and trade. Since they left the EU, the UK has been losing economic benefits which were growing during the time they were in the EU. The UK is now currently facing trade problems like tariffs and costs for extra checks on trading goods. So anything the UK tries to import or export to the EU is taxed and checked. The EU, rejoining the EU would eliminate these unnecessary fees. If the UK continues to stay outside the EU, then their economy will decrease rapidly and debt will grow. Today's news states that after leaving the EU, many problems arose. Supply chain disruptions began to arise, which did not exist during Britain's membership in the EU. They negatively affected many industries and consequently worsened the economy of the entire country. The UK needs to rejoin the EU to sustain their economy, so all the money can be used for something more important than solving unnecessary problems related to trade and tariffs that are possible to avoid. Additionally, the Economics Observatory states that the largest potential economic benefits lie in easy trade frictions that have arisen since the UK's departure from the EU single market and customs union. Full access to the EU single market of over 450 million consumers would restore frictionless trade, reducing costs and bureaucracy for UK business. The Office for Budget Responsibility, OBR, and other research groups estimate that Brexit has led to a long-term reduction in the UK's trade volume and overall trade. Brexit has been caused by lasting harm to the UK economy. The Centre for European Reform 2022 estimates that by mid-2022, the economy was 5.5% smaller than it would have been if Britain had stayed in the EU. That translates into billions lost in output and weaker living standards. Trade volumes have dropped while business investment has stagnated due to uncertainty and reduced access to Europe's single market. The London School of Economics 2023 found that new trade barriers raised important prices of up to 10%, hitting low-income families the hardest, and this worsens the cost of living crisis and fuels inflation. Contention 2. Greater global influence. As a part of a major international bloc, the UK's voice would be magnified on the world stage, giving it greater weight in diplomatic negotiations and trade deals. Being outside the EU has diminished the UK's influence over European policies that's still effective. The Chatham House 2023 says that the UK is increasingly seen as isolated and less capable of shaping global policy. Geopolitical stability. Proponents argue that an era of global uncertainty is crucial for the European nations to work together. A UK inside the EU strengthens the overall security of Europe and its ability to act cohesively on global challenges, according to the World Economic Forum. The current geopolitical climate following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, with wars raging in the Middle East and in Sudan, makes it nearly impossible not to think about what such events when assessing the one's global risk expected to present material crisis in 2025. Enhanced security cooperation. Rejoining would reintegrate the UK into key EU law enforcement and judicial cooperation frameworks, such as Europol and the European arrest warrant. This would help the fight against cross-border crime and terrorism. Addressing post-Brexit issues. Resolving the Northern Ireland Protocol, rejoining the EU would eliminate the need for this protocol, which has complicated trade arrangements and created political tensions around the border in Northern Ireland. Most people thought it was wrong to leave the EU. People were excited to finally leave the EU. But after many years, the regret for that decision grew higher in the public than anyone had ever expected. The vote for leaving won by a small margin of 2%. Many people who had voted to leave were a little bit on the old side to stay, and they have since passed away. According to the Statista, as of May 18, 2023, 55% of Britons thought that it was wrong to leave the EU. And if the EU took that vote again, the majority would probably vote to rejoin the EU. Labor shortages. Brexit has also triggered severe labor shortages. The UK Office for National Statistics 2023 reports over 1 million job vacancies, especially in healthcare, agriculture, and logistics. These gaps exist largely because of free movement ending, cutting off access to needed EU workers. The EU has put in place a new entry/exit system on October 12, 2025, which provides more security to keep the country of the EU safer. This new system is a digital border management system for the 29 countries in the Schengen area, according to Migration and Home Affairs. For all these reasons, economic recovery, stronger influence, and renewed stability, we urge an affirmative vote. The UK's future is stronger inside the European Union than outside of it. Thank you. That is my time and my case.
Hi, I'm Anya Karthikeyan, and I will be the first speaker on the negative. Is anybody not ready? Please begin my time on my first word. My partner and I negate the resolution resolved the United Kingdom should rejoin the European Union. Remaining independent allows the UK to lead the world on climate change and fund its NHS without wasteful EU bureaucracy. We prove this clearly through our contentions on climate leadership and healthcare funding. Contention 1, climate change progress. Leaving the EU has made the UK a climate leader, but rejoining would trap its slow bureaucracy and worsen global warming. As of 2025, the UK is leading in climate change efforts. Climate Change Performance Index 2025 finds that the United Kingdom improves its ranking substantially, up to 6th in the current CCPI rankings, with an overall high performance. The government committed to ending coal production and granting no more licenses for new fossil fuel projects. In 2024, the last coal-fired power station in the UK closed. Meanwhile, the EU is lagging behind. CCPI 2025 states that the European Union receives a medium rating in all four categories: GHG emissions, renewable energy, energy use, and climate policy. The EU was unable to formally incorporate this higher reduction into its NDC. That's because of a wasteful bureaucracy that can't get anything done. Loach 2025 finds that the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive constrains companies to produce a range of standardized environmental and social data. Companies are drowning under a regulatory tsunami. Investors withdrew 30 billion euros from green funds. Affirming worsens climate change by removing the UK's ability to control its policy. UK Parliament 2024 finds that one of the primary arguments for leaving the EU was around the issue of sovereignty. Our leaving the EU was driven in part by a desire to regain control over laws and regulations by reaching too well with those who value national sovereignty. Climate change kills millions. Casella 2024 finds that for every 0.1 degrees Celsius of warming from now on, the world could suffer roughly 100 million deaths. Rejoining the EU locks the UK into a slower climate timeline, delaying decarbonization by years. Every year of delay equals millions of lives lost to heat waves, famine, and flooding. Contention 2: NHS costs. Remaining independent protects NHS modernization and financial stability and prevents public backlash. Since leaving the EU, the UK has given more freedom. HM Government 2022 finds that the UK now has control over all aspects and it's free from the prescriptive EU rules. The UK can unite and level up the country to suit their needs. Currently, the NHS is undergoing significant modernization and improvement. The Department of Health 2025 explains that the NHS future will be a service that offers instant access to help and appointments, one that predicts and prevents ill health rather than simply diagnosing and treating it. EU membership drain billions from drain billions that now fund the NHS. BBC 2016 reports that the UK gross contribution to the EU was 18.8 billion euros in 2014, leaving a net contribution of 8.4 billion euros or 161 million euros a week. Rejoining would revive high EU payments and public outrage. The European Council explains that GNI-based contributions have become the predominant component in the EU's own system, accounting for more than 70% of EU revenue. The NHS funding would save 500,000 lives. Trigo 2025 finds that the NHS long-term plan could save up to 500,000 lives by focusing on prevention. That's 500,000 lives saved through restored investment in preventive medicine. Lives that can only be protected if the UK has economic stability and the EU funding to support them. To summarize, the UK is ranked 6th place in climate change efforts with its world-leading CO2 strategy, while the EU, a slower consistent-driven body, is ranked 17th. By losing the ability to implement fast sovereign policies, the UK contributes to a critical delay in the global decarbonization, which decreases the probability of crossing irreversible climate tipping points. This will lead to 1 billion deaths if we do not negate it. Thank you. I think it's cross now.
Yes, that brings us to the first crossfire. Does either team need prep time?
No, I think I'm good. Does my opponent need any prep time? Okay. If that's so, then may I ask the first question?
Yes.
Thank you. So, yes or no, the EU needs unanimous approval to respond to the Ukraine invasion, right?
Can you please restate the question?
So, yes or no, the EU needs approval to respond to the Ukraine invasion.
Needs approval to respond?
Yeah,
So,
unanimous approval. Needed an unanimous approval to respond to the Ukraine invasion.
but how would they need to respond to the UK in what's it called? The UK invasion. It's saying For ours, it says there are wars. Sorry, give me. For us, it says on my point, it says the current geopolitical climate following Russia's invasion with Ukraine, with wars raging in the Middle East, that doesn't involve the UK currently.
Okay. So is that a yes or a no? And also, would you mind putting the card in the chat?
Yeah. Here, do you mind if I do this after the crossfire?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay.
Do you have a question for me?
No, not really.
Okay. Then if that's so, then I ask a second question.
Yes.
Okay. Can Britain currently act on global threats without needing permission from Brussels?
They currently can, yeah, but why would they want to? If the the best thing would be if they weren't involved in that. That would cause destruction, chaos, and many lives would be lost. So if they were to, it's not forcing them to join. It's not saying since they're out, they have to join a war. Why would you want to join a war? That would just cause destruction and cause you to spend millions on bullets to go into other people.
So is that a no?
That is a no.
Okay. Then how is giving up that freedom going to make us more secure?
That's saying that giving up that freedom, the freedom to. Well, I'm confused on what freedom you are talking about.
Okay. Is that end of class?
I think that might be end of cross. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take like some prep.
Like running prep?
Oh yeah.
All right.
So I'm gonna provide an off-time roadmap. So I'm just gonna go down their arguments one by one in order that they were stated. Time begins with my first word. Judge, the negative case relies on misinformation and exaggeration. I'll take their points in order. First, climate change progress. The next says the EU lags behind and the rejoining traps the UK and worsens global warming. That's factually wrong. According to the European Commission 2024, EU greenhouse gas emissions decreased by 2.5% in 2023, keeping the EU on track to achieve its 55% reduction target by 2030. That means that the EU is actively reducing emissions faster than any other regions. Meanwhile, the Climate Action Tracker rates both the UK and the EU's current policies as insufficient, showing that both still need stronger action, not isolation. The solution isn't to go it alone, but to rejoin and lead with the EU, influencing a bloc responsible for roughly 1/8 of global emissions. And the European Green Deal explicitly states that it will transform the EU into a modern, resource-efficient, and competitive economy, ensuring the no net emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050. That's leadership, not lagging. The UK acting alone cannot regulate emissions from the European markets or influence cross-border energy trade. Leaving limits its leverage. Rejoining restores it. Second, climate deaths. The IPCC Sixth Assessment Report 2023 also projects the significant but not apocalyptic death tolls, emphasizing that health risks increase with rising temperatures, especially from heat-related mortality, but never suggesting millions of deaths. By spreading false numbers, the negative undermines the credibility of their entire impact. The real way to save lives is cooperation on climate policy, not separation. Third, antitrust funding. The NEC argues that EU membership drains billions and costs €161 million a week. That's the same falsehood used in the Brexit campaign. Full Fact 2021 debunks it directly. It's wrong to say that the UK spends 350 million a week to Brussels. That figure doesn't take into account the rebate or the money that comes back. The UK Parliament House of Commons Library 2020 confirms the UK's net contribution to the EU was 12.6 billion in 2020, around 0.6% of GDP. That's minimal compared to NHS spending, and it bought the UK full access to the single market. In fact, the British Medical Journal 2022 reports that Brexit has exacerbated staff shortages and disrupted medical supply chains. That means that leaving the EU hurt the NHS. Rejoining restores free movement of medical professionals, stable pharmaceutical imports, and predictable funding. The claim that leaving frees up money for healthcare is simply false. Fourth, sovereignty. Next is the rejoining gives up control. The sovereignty isn't the same as isolation. Former UK Trade Secretary Liam Fox admitted the idea that Britain has complete sovereignty outside the EU is a myth. We still follow international rules. Right now, the UK must follow EU product and trade standards to export goods, but has no vote in shaping them. Rejoining gives Britain influence again over laws that already affect its economy. Real sovereignty means having a seat at the table, not sitting outside the room obeying someone else's rules. Fifth, public backlash and freedom. The NEG argues that there's backlash against rejoining and that the UK now has more control, but public opinion has shifted. A YouGov poll 2024 found that 63% of Britons now say that the decision to leave the EU was wrong. The majority of the country supports closer ties with rejoining. The democratic will has changed, so staying out doesn't reflect sovereignty, it ignores the people's will. Six, climate ranking. The next is that the UK is sixth in climate change efforts and the EU is bad. That's cherry picked. According to the 2024 Climate Change Performance Index, the UK ranks 11th and the EU bloc, as a bloc, ranks 16th, both in the high performance tier globally. So the EU isn't bad, it's among the leaders. Cooperation between two top performers amplifies success rather than hindering it. The facts prove rejoining strengthens Britain's power, its economy, and its ability to fight climate change. Their case falls apart on every factual front. For these reasons, we strongly urge an affirmative ballot. Thank you.
I will be using 30 minutes of 30 seconds of prep, starting now. Okay, judges ready? Opponents ready? Okay. Um, First, a quick off-time roadmap. First, I'll be frontlining my contentions, and then I'll be refuting my opponent's contentions, and then if time, I will be extending. My time starts in 3, 2, 1. First, on our case. Contention one, climate change. Judge, our climate change contention shows that staying independent lets the UK fight climate change faster and more effectively, and here's why that's true. When Britain left the EU, it gained more freedom to act immediately on climate change goals without waiting for 27 nations to agree. The Climate Change Performance Index finds that the UK improved its ranking to 6th globally, with the high for performance in GHG emissions and energy use, and the last coal plant closed in 2024. That's measurable progress, something the EU has not achieved. Our opponents state that we're lying, that the EU is lagging behind, but we're actually correct because according to the Climate Change Performance Index in 2025, the EU ranked 17th, struggling with inefficiency. Also, the EU's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive created a regulatory tsunami, forcing so much paperwork that investors withdrew 30 billion euros from green funds. This will slow down
the UK's progress because rejoining risks trapping the UK's world-leading CO2 storage strategy in EU regulatory delay, stalling net zero process. Clean Air Task Force states that the UK's storage capacity can no longer be used by CO2 emissions from EU-based sources, meaning that they will have to change their already effective source to something different because the EU does not comply with that. Affirming worsens climate change by increasing economic growth, which will accelerate climate change. Paulson Suzanne finds that economic growth in terms of GDP contributes to environmental degradation and societal harm. Scientists agree that wealthy countries must reduce material production and consumption in order for the world to successfully tackle climate change, biodiversity collapse, ocean acidification, water scarcity, and other environmental problems against their first contention about access to the single market and economy. So their contention is non-unique because there is an EU-UK reset deal on track to fix these problems. There is not a significant difference in EU trade post-Brexit. Service trade has performed well and represent a higher percentage of GDP than before the pandemic. And finally, there are no obvious differences between trends in exports to the EU and to the rest of the world. In May, the EU and the UK agreed on a major reset trade deal. Nearly 9 years after it voted to leave the bloc, Britain reached a wide-ranging deal with the EU, including a security and defense pact, fewer restrictions on British food exporters, visitors, and a contentious new fishing argument. The new deal has comprehensive access for defense, fishing, and workers. Holton Kate states that in return, Britain has agreed to outline of a limited scheme to let young and EU and British people to live and work in each other's territories for periods. The reset deal should lead to an increase in GDP for the UK. Because of all these negotiations, the UK has already invested a lot of time and effort into these negotiations, so there's no need to re-enter the EU. On their final contention about the UK being a greater leader. That is untrue because NATO is the true global leader, not the EU. The UK's global leadership and security is defined by its role in NATO. The UK is a leading European member of NATO, possessing one of Europe's two nuclear deterrents and spending over 2% of GDP on defense. Judge, you can clearly see that the UK is a co-pilot of European security through NATO. The EU's security structures are slower and consensus-driven, and as my partner stated, it has to reach a consensus of 27 member countries. Think about how long that will take. As a sovereign actor, the UK can be more agile and decisive. For example, the UK was among the first Western allies to provide long-range strike missiles and tanks to Ukraine. Judge, for these reasons, we strongly urge a neg vote. Thank you.
All right, that brings us to the second crossfire. Is everyone ready?
Yes. Okay, we can begin. Do you want to ask the first question?
Sure. So can the UK really influence global digital and climate rules more on its own rather than inside the world's second largest economic bloc?
So, wait, can you repeat your question?
Can the UK really influence global digital and climate rules more on its own than instead of the world's second largest economic bloc?
Yes, I think it can because we have already seen that outside of the EU, it's already leading in climate change efforts. I can send the card showing that the EU is currently ranked 17th while the UK is ranked 6th. And secondly, the EU is a slow consensus-driven body. Imagine how long it will take for 27 countries to reach a decision. The UK can work faster by itself, creating policies that reflect what the people actually want. And we've already shown examples of their world-leading CO2 strategy, which does not comply with EU sources, which means that they'll have to change their strategy, making it more ineffective.
But oh, sorry.
Can I ask the next question? Okay. So do you guys have a response on our reset trade deal um, rebuttal, or will you guys respond to that in summary?
What do you mean? The trade deals? Like the trade
So
deals that they have right now?
So we were in my rebuttal, I was talking about the reset trade deal, which is about how the UK and EU um have already made new negotiations on talking about like like more freedom of movement, defense, fishing, and agricultural agreements. So if we rejoin, the UK has already successfully adapted by making these negotiations. So if we rejoin, won't it basically mean that's useless and all the time they spent is useless?
Not really. If you rejoin, then wouldn't those like things go smoother? Like, because right now, when they're trading to the EU, they have to deal with things like extra costs and tariffs.
I know, but they've already made negotiations focusing on if they because they're out of the EU right now, they've already made negotiations showing that there are fewer restrictions on movement of people, yet it still has its ability to be a sovereign actor for climate change and those rules. It just has fewer limitations on trade. So by rejoining, wouldn't those negotiations that they've already done be useless since they've spent so much time on it?
I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be in vain.
Okay, do you have a question? Oh, actually, I think Cross is
The
almost up.
time. Oh, okay.
That brings us to the summary.
Okay. So time will be time will begin on my first word. Judge, the UK needs to rejoin the EU to sustain their economy benefits and trade. The regret just keeps growing, so it's better to rejoin. Currently, tariffs are affecting the UK's trade and making everything more expensive. If the UK were to rejoin the EU, then all their trade problems with the EU would be resolved. The UK could eliminate all the unnecessary fees by simply rejoining the EU. If the UK continues to stay outside the EU, then their economy will decrease rapidly and debt will grow. The UK needs to rejoin the EU to sustain their economy so all the money can be used for something more important than solving unnecessary problems related to trade and tariffs that are possible to avoid. Brexit also triggered severe labor shortages. The UK Office for National Statistics reports over 1 million job vacancies, especially in healthcare, agriculture, and logistics. These gaps exist largely because of free movement ending, cutting off access to needed EU workers. Greater global influence as a part of major international bloc, the UK's voice would be magnified on the world stage, giving it greater weight in diplomatic negotiations and trade deals. Being outside the EU has diminished the UK's influence over European policies still effective. The Chatham House 2023 says that the UK is increasingly seen as isolated, less capable of shaping global policy. Now we collapse on geopolitical stability. Proponents argue that an era of global uncertainty is crucial for European nations to work together. A UK inside the EU strengthens the overall security of Europe and its ability to act cohesively on global challenges. According to the World Economic Forum, the current geopolitical climate, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine and with wars raging in the Middle East and in Sudan, makes it nearly impossible not to think about such events when assessing one's global risk, expected to present a material crisis in 2025. Enhanced security cooperation. Rejoining would reintegrate the UK into key EU law and enforcement and judicial cooperation frameworks such as Europol and the European Arrest Warrant. This would enhance the fight against cross-border crime and terrorism, along with things like drug rigs. Economic impact firsthand. Neg argues the EU membership drains billions and costs 161 million euros a week. That is the same falsehood used in the Brexit campaign. Full Fact 2021 debunks it directly. It is wrong to say the EU sends 350 million a week to Brussels. That figure doesn't take it into account into rebate or the money that comes back. Tolls emphasizing the health risks increase rising temperatures, especially from heat-related mortality, but never suggesting billions of deaths. By spreading false numbers, the negative undermines the credibility of their entire impact. The real way to save lives is cooperation on climate policy, not separation. My opponents state that staying out of 28 countries for a decision is faster. However, it is not effective. For these reasons, Judge, I strongly urge an affirmative ballot. Thank you.
All right, that brings us to the negative summary.
How much prep time do we have left?
You
Both teams have
have
about 2 minutes and 20 seconds left to prep.
Thank you. I'll take a minute and 30, please. I think I'm good. Judge, I'll start with with the affirmatives case, respond to their main points, and show why their arguments don't hold. Then move to our climate change contention, explain why it's true, and finish with weighing. Is anybody not ready? Please begin my time on my first word. Let's start with our opponent's case. Judge, when you first hear the affirmative world, it might sound appealing, talking about economic recovery and global cooperation. But once you examine their arguments, their case doesn't hold up against real world data. They began by saying we rely on misinformation, but that doesn't make sense because our evidence came directly from verified government and climate resources. Now let's go on to their first contention about broader economic and business benefits. They argue that rejoining boosts investment and helps businesses, but that doesn't make sense because global factors, not Brexit, caused most short-term slowdowns. COVID, inflation, and Ukraine war hit every economy, including those inside the EU. If EU membership automatically fixed growth, every EU member would be thriving, and they're not. Meanwhile, Britain's independence has already created new trade opportunities and business flexibility, such as the reset trade deal. The UK has invested a lot of time and effort into the new negotiations. There's no need to re-enter the EU. Nearly 9 years after it voted to leave the bloc, Britain reached a wide-ranging deal with EU, including a security and defence pact with fewer restrictions on British food exporters and visitors, and a contentious new fishing agreement, which my partner stated in her speech. Now let's move on to their second contention. We have shown that rejoining provides no benefit of being a global leader. My partner showed that NATO is the true leader, not the EU, and the UK is already a key leader there. The UK's nuclear status and its role in the NATO is independent, not connected to the EU. Rejoining would only slow the UK down without adding military power. Also, we have clearly shown that rejoining risks trapping the UK's world-leading CO2 storage strategy in the EU regulatory delay, slowing net zero progress. Now let's move on to our case about climate change. Judge, our climate change contention shows that staying independent lets the UK fight climate change faster and more effectively. Here's why that's true. When Britain left the EU, it gained the freedom to act immediately on climate goals without waiting for 27 nations to agree. The Climate Change Performance Index 2025 confirms that the UK's rank improved to 6 globally with high scores in the greenhouse gas reduction and energy use. And in 2024, the last coal plant closed. That's measurable progress, something that the EU hasn't achieved. Finally, let's weigh. By timeframe, climate tipping points are within the next decade. Every year of delay matters. The UK is acting now, while EU bureaucracy slows real change. By magnitude, climate change threatens everyone. Billions of lives, global food systems, and ecosystems. There's no larger impact in this round. By probability, the UK's independent record proves success, ranked 6th globally, while the EU's slower system ranks 17th. Even if the AF wins small claims about economics or trade, those can't outweigh the loss of global climate leadership and the billions lives at stake. Judge, this round ultimately comes down to one clear voter: climate change versus economy. Even if the AF wins small gains in trade or GDP, those don't matter if the planet becomes unlivable. Economic growth is irreversible, climate collapse isn't. That's why the ballot goes to negative, to protect billions of lives and preserve the only planet we have. Thank you.
All right, and that brings us to Grand Cross.
Okay. Do you guys want to ask the first question?
Sure. So the EU, so you said that the UK would have to wait on 27 other countries to make decisions, but the EU lets member states make their own decisions on things like taxes, defense, and foreign policies. So wouldn't that be false?
No, I disagree with that because because countries can veto against that, can veto against any rule, which will slow down time. Then they'll have to negotiate a new plan, and then they'll have to compromise. For example, let's say some another country doesn't agree with these taxes, they can be like, I veto this idea, and this will increase the time of decision making, while the UK can make fast decisions based on any climate issues or things like that. Can my partner ask the next question? Anya, you can ask the question if you want.
Okay. So you say sovereignty doesn't matter, then why did 17 million people vote for it?
You just like lagged a little bit.
Oh, can you hear me? Can you guys hear me now? Okay. So I'll repeat my question. So you say sovereignty doesn't matter, then why did 17 million people vote for it?
When did we say sovereignty didn't matter?
You stated that in your rebuttal. You said sovereignty is in isolation.
Well, also only it was a very small margin by only 2% that the winning vote. And then now, I have a card for this.
Okay. If you could
Um,
paste that in the chat, then that'd be great.
yeah. Where is it? Here we go.
Okay. Thank you. Do you mind sharing the link of that too, if that's possible?
Yeah. Um,
And I think that's cross.
okay.
That brings us to final focus for the affirmative.
Can I take prep?
Who said that? I'm sorry.
I did. Affirmative.
Yes.
Okay, I'm ready. I'm gonna provide an off-time roadmap. First, I'm just gonna highlight some of our key points, and then I'm gonna weigh. Timing is my first word. Judge, this round comes down to who best secures a future where Britain is powerful, safe, and capable of leading on climate. The negative wants you to believe that the UK can handle everything alone, but isolation has only limited its influence and slowed real progress. First, on climate, they argue that the EU's bureaucracy slows change, and that NATO, not the EU, is the true leader. But NATO is a military alliance. It doesn't regulate emissions or fund renewable infrastructure. The EU, by contrast, already runs the world's largest carbon market and finances renewable transition through the Green Deal. The European Commission 2024 confirms the EU greenhouse gas emissions decreased by 2.5% compared to 2022, keeping the EU on track to achieve its 55% reduction goal by 2030. That's measurable progress. They said that the UK can do it faster alone, but the Climate Action Tracker rates both the UK and the EU as insufficient. That means that both are falling short, and working together is the only way to meet the global tipping points they themselves bring up. Acting alone doesn't accelerate progress, it fragments it. Now let's why. First, on magnitude. Climate change threatens every human being. Economic concerns pale beside it. But rejoining directly tackles that magnitude by empowering Britain to lead coordinated European mitigation. On time frame, they say that the next decade is crucial, exactly why Britain must rejoin now to shape EU policy before it's too late. On probability, EU coordination and trade stability are proven. The idea that Britain alone can shift global climate outcomes is not. So, Judge, the choice between UK shining from the outside or leading from within. The negatives isolation means less power, less cooperation, and slower climate action. Rejoining gives Britain a voice, a vote, and a future worth living in. For all these reasons, we strongly urge an affirmative ballot. Thank you.
And that brings us to the negative final focus.
I'll be taking the rest of my prep time.
And that is it for prep time.
Okay. Judge ready? Opponents ready? Okay. So I'll be doing a quick off-time roadmap. First, I'll be highlighting some key points in the round, and then I will go on to weigh. My time starts in 3, 2, 1. So we defeated their first contention because we have consistently brought up the reset trade deal with no sort of response from their side. We have defeated their second contention because we have shown that the UK is leading with their climate change efforts and rejoining does not provide any effort because NATO and the UK's nuclear status are the main factors which contribute to security. They have barely touched this response. Judge, as you can see, their contentions do not stand. We won our contention too because we showed that when Britain left the EU, it gained the freedom to act immediately on its net zero goals without waiting for 27 countries to agree. According to the European policy analysis, the EU is simply ineffective in climate change. We have clearly shown that investors have withdrawn 30 billion euros from green funds, and rejoining risks trapping the UK's world-leading CO2 strategy in EU regulatory delay. We wait on climate change. Climate change comes first in both time and logic. It's the prerequisite to every other impact in this round. You can't have a functioning job, markets, or trade if rising sea destroys infrastructures, heat wave collapses, agriculture and food floods wipe out cities. Economic growth depends on climate stability, not the other way around. And the tipping points are happening now, not decades from now. Once the Arctic melts or temperatures exceed 1.5%, those changes are irreversible. You can rebuild an economy, but you can't rebuild a planet. Climate change affects everyone, everywhere. Billions of people, food systems, and ecosystems. Casella 24 finds every 0.1% of Celsius of warming cause roughly 100 million deaths. The app talks about short-term GDP growth, but no amount of profit matters in a world that's unlivable. Our impact is certain because it's already happening. The Climate Change Performance Index 2025 ranks the UK 6th globally, proving independence leads to faster emission cuts, while the EU is ranked 17th. Judge, for these reasons, we strongly urge a neg vote. Thank you. Great round, everybody. Good job.
You guys did really good.
Thank you, Judge. Great job to Potomac VL. You guys did
Thank you
an
so much,
amazing job.
judges.
Yeah, good round, everybody.
The person who voted last would have to state the decisions.
Oh, my apologies. I think that was me. So, sorry, let me go back to that. Okay. I believe that it ultimately went down to affirmation. I voted for negation. The other judges were unanimous in favor of affirmation. For me, it was very close. I ended up actually going for negation based on pretty much just the weighing mechanisms that were provided by the very end of the full debate. I just felt as though they were able to more succinctly respond to more of the contentions that were put forth, while also providing a very clear sense of the urgency of responding to climate change. I thought was fairly effective, and I didn't think that affirmation really responded to that, in my opinion, sufficiently. However, I've clearly been outweighed, so I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic to somebody who did vote for affirmation. So go right ahead.
I also
Oh, you go ahead. Yeah.
I voted for the AF. Like Kit said, this was a very close debate. I could see myself voting either way. Both teams did an excellent job. I also voted basically due to weighing and final focus. However, I felt more swayed by the affirmative. But as I said before, in general, I could have voted either way. Both teams did everything that I look for, which is stating your contention, stating your impacts, and being aware of like where your opponent may have, what's the word I'm looking for, may not have fully delivered upon in your final focus. And you both teams did that exceptionally well. Um, that was pretty much it for me. So
I agree with Alexandra. I vote for the AF. I think one big thing I would have liked to see was more of a response to the argument uh, that the AF posed about how overspending with the NHS is Brexit propaganda. I would have liked to see the neg go further when discussing that, and I would have liked to see the neg tap more into probability, such as like, what's the point of rejoining the EU if it's not even probable that the UK could actually join the EU? Since you mentioned how many member states there are and how the issues of the bureaucracy with the EU would is such a problem for other decisions, wouldn't it be hard to just rejoin? And then one thing is, I just didn't see for the case of the neg, I didn't see enough of a argument made to show that current allyships, like a different with other nations that are non-EU nations, is strong enough to replace the economic gains of being a part of the EU. But yeah, I could have voted either way. It was a really close case for me, and yeah, both sides did a really good job. Yeah.
Yeah, altogether, this was a really good round to have in finals because it was seriously like every speaker brought their A game. Every one of y'all should be very proud of what you did today. So that was a really good job.
Thank you, judges. Nice round to
Thank you.
Potomac for y'all.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
folks.